So it is my great pleasure to welcome to the newest installment of Kinarm's Heritage Minutes, Doctors Stephen Scott of Queen's University at Kingston and Dr. Kane Park of University of Ottawa, who are co-developers of the Fast Feedback Interception Task, or what we lovingly call FFI in here at Kinarm. And FFI has just been released as part of Dexterity 311. Dexterity, of course, is the software that controls your Kinarm lab. And so we brought them here together to ask a few questions about its development and what they were thinking at the time of its creation. So first, I want to give you each an opportunity to introduce yourselves. So Kane, would you like to tell us a little bit about the research questions that you're pursuing these days?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Kane Park. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Ottawa right now. And currently I'm using robotics to understand neurological behavior and also neurological disorder. So the first is to understand how we move in this world. And then once we understand that, we can transfer it over to neurological disorders to see how impairments in our movement can be assessed using robotic technologies. My current work is actually looking at using the KinArm robot to do interventions. And so we can do a lot of interesting interventions on the KinArm because it's an interactive device compared to other potential rehabilitation techniques like on the computer, just playing simple like button press games, which is kind of boring, frankly, and not very interactive. So the KinArm provides a really good environment for that. So that's my current line of research.
Great. No, thanks, Kane. And Steve, would you like to tell us what questions are dodging you these days?
Okay, well, I'm Stephen Scott. I'm a professor in the Department of Biomedical and Molecular Sciences at Queen's. And my research program has a range of topics. I do neural basis of voluntary control in non-human primates. I study fundamental motor control in humans and also have my application trying to look at how robotics can be applied to study sensory motor and cognitive functions in various patient groups. So it's all are built around using the KinArm robot. And for the clinical side, it's very much trying to think about new novel tasks that get at different aspects of brain function, just like FFI is very much targeting a specific area.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both. And first, before I got going, I really wanted to express our appreciation to both of you that, both of you played a real, key role in helping us to actually translate that task from your lab to now into the software that allows all of our KinArm users to use this and to take advantage of your analysis and what you've learned and your normative data as well. So really, really great, many thanks, and especially to your labs in Queen's University. Really important translational aspect. So, Steve, I thought I would start back with your paper that you wrote, Park et al. 2023, and specifically the comment that you make in it. A key motor skill is the ability to rapidly interact with our dynamic environment. So, can you explain a little bit to us more about why sensory feedback is so important to our effective movement in the world?
Sure. This is one of the interesting features about this task and sensory feedback is it is a task that was driven from the fundamental research program in my lab, really trying to understand how do we move and interact in the world. And we use a theory called optimal control, and it articulates how we should move and interact in the world. And a pivotal component of this theory is the use of sensory feedback to rapidly make corrective responses. It's also very important for making decisions of future things you want to do. So the theory really drove home the importance of how our brains can take visual information or proprioceptive information. Where do we feel where our arms are? We have lots of afferents in our muscles, in our skin, that provide information about how we're moving and how that is essential for driving your voluntary movements to grab a cup of coffee or do anything you perform. So the theoretical framework said this is important. We did a lot of basic research studies to illustrate just how quickly humans can quickly take sensory information, sense that some disturbances happened in the world and make corrections. And these corrections are incredibly quick. They're under 100 milliseconds. that we are already making corrective responses. So that timeline, when you blink your eyes, is about 200 milliseconds. So the ability to drive your motor actions is incredibly quick in less than a blink of an eye. So we took that idea, and then it really was, how do we implement that in a clinical tool that's outside sort of the basic research realm? So very different problem.
Yeah, and then so great, a way to extend the next question would be, so how are those circuits interrupted or affected by virtue of, neurological injury, disease, other effect? What happens when things go wrong?
Right. Well, the brain circuits to allow us to move and interact in the world are highly distributed. We use lots of our cerebral cortex, cerebellum, spinal cord, brainstem. So they're highly distributed, and they all have to work together to allow us to have this ability to sense where we are and generate motor actions. A stroke can put a small lesion anywhere in that circuit. And if it's in different locations, you get slightly different types of impairments in the motor skills, in the use of sensory information. Maybe it's perception. So these lesions really disrupt a very specific function, or it actually can impact many different types of brain functions at the same time. And that's really what we want to know, is what's wrong and why.
Yeah, and I think you've honestly answered my next question, which is really why is it important to identify these impairments?
Well, it's nice to identify, but why do you really want to know? You really want to know because is there opportunities for therapeutic interventions? So if you don't know what's wrong, how do you know what you need to compensate? Or at least knowing what are the problems and impairments one has, so that you can make adjustments in how you interact in the world, or recognize some things you should do now, and some things, maybe like driving, you probably shouldn't do if you have these very specific types of impairments. So it guides the therapy. It also guides changes in your what you can and cannot do to be safe and interact in the world.
Right. No, it's so important, so challenging. So I'm curious, is there currently a way to assess these circuits or a subset of circuits in the current clinical practice area? I know you're not a clinician, but how do they look at this presently?
It's this issue of trying to use sensory to guide motor action and its contribution. There's not a lot. One of the standard tests they'll do is they'll ask the subject to touch their nose. The clinician will have their finger, and then they'll ask the patient to go back and forth. And so they can try to move their finger quickly as subject's reaching the participant or the patient, and they're looking for a correct movement. They're just visually watching. And so it is a very subjective process. It's fairly qualitative. They can score it, but they literally score it 0, 1, or 2. So very limited amount of information. And so that's a major problem with trying to study this specific aspect of, can you take sensory information and guide what are very quick, rapid corrective responses that normally we are able to do. So very difficult to do with traditional clinical tools.
And then thinking about our approach to assessment, and specifically the Keen Arm Standard Test Suite, do we not already sort of cover this area through some of the existing tasks that are out, or not really?
Well, tasks like visual guided reaching, at one level, we're looking to see, can you generally use vision to see an object and reach to it? You may have, let's say you can reach, you can reach, but you have a bit of impairments. One of the challenges we have is, if you're impaired in it, we can't know exactly what's wrong. Is it a weakness? Is there a coordination problem? Is it that you're not able to use sensory information to guide the motor action? So a task like reaching is very good for a general, are you impaired in this very important skill? But what is the underlying impairment is not obvious from a simple thing of asking someone to perform an action. And that's really what this is, to try to delve deeper into the fundamentals and underlying processes necessary for goal-directed movements.
No, that's great. And you've really sort of set up the whole problem statement, really well. And certainly want to give Kane an opportunity to now, digest. I know this was really the subject of your PhD thesis, wasn't it, Kate? So you know this task intimately. You've seen subjects use it, both, able and impaired subjects. So I thought maybe we should start with really understanding, okay, or describing what is the task? What is it that the subject is required to do?
Sure. Yeah. So the task is interception task at the end of the day. So the baseline pot thing we're looking at is how well can participants intercept a target moving towards them. And so what happens is the participant holds their hand at a certain location on the screen, and they're told they can only move kind of horizontally in the x-axis. We have like a kind of a workspace that they're confined to. So if they kind of try and move too far up or too far down or even too far to the left and the right, the robot will physically contain them inside a rectangular box. And so they're told intercept target if it comes to you that's white, and if it ever turns red, you want to avoid it. So most of the trials, most of the perturbations we have for this task are when the ball is white. So the ball is going to come towards them, and then one of four things can happen. So the ball can just come straight towards them. They just have to hold their posture, and then the ball will be intercepted by their paddle, and they'll feel some haptic feedback to indicate success. Another thing that can happen is that the ball can come towards them, but it can rapidly shift location left or right, and then continue the trajectory towards them. And so they have to make a quick movement to left or right to intercept the target. The ball can come towards them, and then the actual position of the paddle, where the hand is supposed to be, can move left or right. And then again, they have to make a quick movement. And so those two trials will test how quickly they can react to visual perturbation. Another trial we have is a mechanical perturbation. So the ball moves towards them just like usual, but during that, the robot applies a force to their arm to the left or to the right, and they have to quickly make a rapid motor action to come back to the center to intercept the ball. And then the last trial we have is task switch. So I mentioned before that if the ball ever turns red, they want to actually get out of the way of the ball instead of intercepting, they want to avoid. And so in this case, the ball comes down as usual, it's white, and then it turns red, and then they have to get out of the way so that the ball can go past them.
So that's a complex task. You've got a lot
Yep.
going on there, a lot of different conditions. And I know one of the key aspects for any task that we've designed is to try and make sure it's short so that a subject, especially if one is impaired, who may be fatigued, doesn't fatigue during this task. So it sounds like you really had that sort of key light bulb moment when you realize have the task come to the subject rather than the subject reach out to the task, to the interaction, to the object, to the perturbation, which really, to me, was kind of a really fascinating way of looking at this problem conceptually. How do we assess all these different conditions in a really short period of time, and ensure that the subject can complete the task effectively in that time? So two questions I want to ask from that. One, I'm thinking, okay, so what are you measuring? Because you've got all these different different conditions. And we often, I know as part of the process, you've got a ton of data coming at you from the kin arm. You've had to figure out those parameters that actually characterize the movement and do so in a way that we can differentiate between healthy behavior and non-healthy behavior. So what is it that you are measuring? What parameters that you find were effective?
So sorry, what was the first part of that question?
Thinking about the parameters, like what is actually being measured?
Oh, yeah. So, like, obviously, for this task, the fast feedback interception task, we want to assess how quickly people can respond. So, obviously, the first one is the main one is reaction time. So, we have it set so that the ball comes down, and then at a certain point, a controlled point, we know when it's going to be perturbed. So, when we look at the actual data, we know perturbation onset, and then we can look at the kinematics of hand movement to know when actual movement started. In this case, in the fee task, it's a bit complicated for mechanical perturbations because people's arms are already in motion actually when we want to look at reaction time. So something like the visual shifts I mentioned, the target shift and the paddle shift, we see an onset of movement. So that one's a bit easier to find reaction time because we can get whenever they break their posture speed, at a certain point, that is our reaction time. But for the mechanical perturbations, the robot's already moving your arm. So at that point, we have to assess, or we have to address the question of when is actual movement onset. And so for that one, we say it's the first minimum of hand speed after the perturbation. So when you see the hand move, it moves in a certain direction and then has to go back to the center. So we see a minimum there, and then we can say that's the point of the reaction, and we get the reaction time from that. And so reaction time, very important. Another parameter we looked at as well is endpoint distance, which is just a measure of accuracy. So how close were they to the target? Not necessarily did they hit it or did they not, because someone who has a stroke might be able to get pretty close, but if they don't hit it, we can't just say like a binary pass fail. It's a much more accurate measure of saying you were this centimeter away from the target when it was near you. So we can have a bit more quantitative data rather than a binary measure.
Right. So you just mentioned that you were looking at subjects with stroke. Was that the population that you were primarily interested in?
Yeah, so for my PhD, I focused on individuals with stroke and comparing them to healthy controls to see whether impairments, whether they could be impaired in the fee task. So the big point of the main part of my project was the fee paper. So where we looked at individuals with stroke, and we wanted to see whether, firstly, if they can be impaired in the fast feedback interception task, and whether specific impairments and specific perturbations were evident. So instead of just impaired in like the visual perturbations as well as mechanical, we wanted to see if select individuals could be impaired in only the mechanical perturbations, but not impaired in vision and vice versa. And so we did find a few participants that showed this. So most of them were impaired in vision, but not in proprioception, the ones that we did find. And I don't believe we found any that were impaired solely in proprioception, but not in vision. So that would be quite unique to find. And perhaps if we collect more data, we can see that.
Fascinating, fascinating. So, Steve, I guess maybe coming back to you then, thinking about, okay, so, um, how do these impairments, again, thinking about connecting to the other care center tests, how do these impairments in the fast feedback interception sort of connect with impairments in some of the other KST? I know that's kind of a speculative question a little bit, but what did you see from that, or what do you expect to see?
Well, we're actually in the middle of this analysis. So we're continuing, science continues. And
Yes.
one of the questions is now that you identify some people that are impaired with using sensory feedback to generate motor actions, how does that compare to reaching? Do all of those people are impaired? Is there some people that have good use of sensory feedback, but they are still impaired in reaching performance? We are also comparing to proprioceptive functions. So when you use muscle afferents to tell you where your arms are in space, that's a perceptual use of this afferent information. We're looking for using the same sensory receptors that are now used to help you guide your motor action. So are they overlapping or not? So in other words, when you're using sensory information, is it the same people impaired for motor action as for perception is what we would normally call in the literature. And so when you go through all the different individuals, you do commonly see several that are impaired in all three, but you can also find some that are more selectively impaired in, say, using sensory information for guiding action versus there's no impairments with proprioception. So again, a dissociation. So kind of as I mentioned earlier on, the real goal is to be able to find out exactly what the types of impairments are for each individual. And from a therapeutic, then that tells you that individual patient should deal with this type of therapy. So it's trying to create a much more patient-centered approach to healthcare. And that's a big part of what our overall goal with this technology in clinical assessment.
Yeah, no, and it's a great speaking to that sort of next step. And Kane, apologies, I realized I wanted to ask you a follow-up question to the subjects that you saw, and specifically the ones with stroke, because we've heard from other users that a lot of subjects with stroke will complain of some sort of shoulder pain. Was there any known sort of concern for or complaint? Like, what was the user experience like, I guess, when they were actually doing the task? Was there any concerns raised at that time, or?
I initially had concerns myself. So for the mechanical perturbations, like we apply a force to people's arms and we don't scale it to the person's weight,
Mm,
which would might help, but it would make the task a lot more complicated to implement and analyze. And so we just have a standard force applied to everyone's arms. And I was in one of the days when a participant with stroke came in and they were quite small. And you could see that the mechanical perturbations were pushing far. But the good thing about the task is that the rectangular blocks I mentioned earlier, there's physical limits to how far someone's arm can get pushed.
mm,
And so once they reach the end, they'll just hit a wall and like their arm won't get like jerked too far from what I can tell. And from this data I've seen, the technicians I've talked to, the actual stroke patients I've also seen, there hasn't been any mention of any potential pain or anything so far, but fingers crossed that nothing serious can happen. The robot has a lot of safety measures implemented, so I can't see anything bad happening.
yeah, no, and that's great feedback because, as you know, we've already had questions from existing keen users who are anxious to get their hands on this task. So great feedback to help them in the future and in working this task into their studies, both from an assessment perspective and as a rehab question too. And I think that kind of brings us to that sort of final, question, Steve, if you might want to sort of speculate it a little bit, in terms of, now that we know this information, how might it guide interventions, therapy, rehab, and then knowing too that this could potentially be used across a whole bunch of different patient populations.
Well, it's an open, interesting question. You brought up two things. One is, what are the types of impairments, other diseases and injuries? Which patient groups will commonly have these impairments versus not? So that's a very much open question that we are very interested in trying to address, and hopefully others that have Kinarm standard tests can actually address them with their patient groups, because that's an open question. For the therapy, now that we know that this is a common problem in many participants with stroke, it opens the door of what is the best way of, can you use therapy to improve this? I suspect maybe some yes, and maybe some no. It depends on where the lesion is, and that's a research question. But for those that it can help, would it just be very valuable to have rehabilitation tests similar to this, maybe different variants, maybe a little more interactive, to try to practice and improve this skill of being able to take what residual information they have and to better use that to relearn to generate these fast goal-directed corrections. And so that's a exciting new opportunity for ourselves or for other research groups to try to really find out what is possible in the future.
As always, one question begets many more questions, and that's the fun of doing research. So, no, that was a fantastic summary. I think, is there anything that I've missed that you folks really wanted to share, or do you think we've sort of given the good overview of the fast feedback interception task?
Um, yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to kind of poke at the kind of importance of having the task as an interception rather than a reaching.
Mm,
Just because you mentioned earlier that stroke participants they can fatigue quite quickly. And so having the task as an interception rather than a reaching can save a lot of time for the actual task, because it's not just the fast feedback we have to assess, it's the whole variety of different tasks or different motor skills that we should be assessing. And
yes.
so having the task as an interception task rather than reaching can reduce the time needed to reach to a target from, let's say, up to 6 seconds for someone with stroke to what we have now is like 500 to 700 milliseconds. And so we can reduce the task time a lot to actually assess different perturbations and sensory modalities in this task within a short period of time.
Yeah, great point. Really great point. Steve, any comments further from you?
No, I think that's good. I do, it was the bit of the, as you went back, the aha moment of trying to flip the task around. And that was sort of the pivotal moment of realizing if you tried to have subjects reaching and you have so many different variants that when you look at the fundamental papers, research papers, they take 20 minutes, half an hour to do even a subset of the tasks we have embedded in this task. So it was really trying to figure out how to simplify, get the same principles out, but in a fraction of the time. And this is always a strategy or a thing we keep in our mind is time is at essence when you're doing assessments. So constantly trying to figure out how you can get more information with less time is essential for us to try to move this along, because it's not just this task, it's all of the other tasks, and trying to figure out how you can have a very broad-based assessment of many sensory motor cognitive processes in a very short time. So I think this was a good example of that objective of trying to speed the process up and get lots of different types of information all in one package.
Yeah, great summary. Thank you both, really, again, for your time, Dr. Kane Park, Dr. Stephen Scott. You know, you folks and your dedication to this area of research and to robust, as you said, Steve, neurological assessment really is extremely meaningful, not only to Keen users, but beyond the reach of Keen as well, and hopefully will impact greatly our approach to various neurological diseases and injuries. So really appreciate your dedication to the field and for allowing this fast feedback interception test to be now shared with Keen users. And just a quick plug of reminder that all of the details on the FFI task are available in the KST summary, the Keen Standard Test Summary, which is available on the Keen website, keenarm.com, and it's a publicly available document, because we really want to ensure that people have access to the document, and of course to ease the publication burden, as we like to say, with showing where this data has come from. And we hope we have done the task justice, and we hope we have given our explanation and the rigor behind that analysis and our management of the data. We hope that we have given that justice as well in that document. So certainly encourage people to look at that. So thank you very much again for participating in this Heritage Minute of KinArm.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne.